Well, okay. Welcome back to Jaded Hero Worship. I seem to be in the minority opinion at the moment with this new X-Men 97 show, and already people seem to be getting a little militant about it. Over at Nando V Movies, this episode is being touted as everything. Okay. Do we need to call out the shills anymore? Look, I understand that everyone is going to bring their own experiences and personal tastes with them when they view a narrative or any piece of content. But Jesus, can we all calm down here? The sheer overdramatics in pronouncing this garbage, everything, is staggering. I am trying as much as possible to remain objective regarding the show's content and storytelling. But at the end of the day, all I can do is remain true to my own storytelling sensibilities and point out the multitude of issues I see present in this content. Right now, apparently, Episode 5 is being seen as some massive, impactful, and devastating character piece. I would submit the dissenting opinion. Okay, before you claim that I'm being contrarian for the sake of it, let me get the plot breakdown out of the way. The episode opens with Trish Tilby doing a long-form, 60-minute style expose on the X-Men. I suppose that could make sense, although the whole thing is so abruptly introduced and done that it doesn't really give you time to question it. Would the X-Men just publicly put their school out there for the world to know? Not so sure myself, since it was always a secret. But sure, fine. The X-Men are doing interviews at the mansion. Meanwhile, Gambit, Rogue, and Magneto are on their way to the mutant island nation of Genosha, which has just been formally inducted into the United Nations. Magneto takes every opportunity to belittle Gambit and mocks his inability to fly if the plane were to crash. I hate Magneto in this show so much. Magneto meets with the Mutant Council, made up of Moira McTaggart, Banshee, Sebastian Shaw, Emma Frost, and Madeline Pryor. When we last saw Madeline, she hinted she was going to walk the earth, Jules style. But nope, she's here. The council wants Magneto to be the ruler of Genosha, although Magneto takes some convincing. But after being reminded that Charles Xavier would want him to do it, he agrees with his usual for this show at least, creepy smugness and makes one demand. Rogue and Gambit are being shown around Genosha by Nightcrawler, who, although drastically simplified in design, is at least well presented character-wise. He and Gambit are really the only two characters that come out of this show with any respect towards their characterization. Nightcrawler calls out Gambit for being dramatic about Rogue, although I would argue it's more the other way, and then claims Rogue truly loves him. Magneto presents Rogue with his condition for ruling Genosha, her as his queen. She rightly calls him out for his creepy manipulation, but of course Rogue is conflicted because Magneto being able to touch her apparently cancels out his creepy stalker mentality. We'll get more on this problematic sexual messaging portion of the episode later. But for now, we cut over to Cyclops being interviewed, and again, I don't know if it's the voice actor or the performance, but I can't get Jerry Smith from Rick and Morty out of my head when Cyclops reads his dialogue. Cyclops' interview is intercut with Jean and Wolverine out in the lake around the mansion, where Jean is playing Moses and trying to put her memories and feelings back together. Wolverine, who has almost no characterization in this show, has come out to check on her. In a scene that cuts back and forth between the two, Jean begins recounting the moment she and Cyclops went for a picnic when she was succumbing to the Phoenix entity. Cyclops is, for no clear reason, also sharing this story on national television with Trish. Then, Cyclops is asked about baby Nathan and goes off on a rant about how lucky humans are that mutants exist. Yeah, more on this in a bit. And then, Jean kisses Wolverine, because we're heading to the plotline of the non-clone Jean realizing she loves Wolverine, or feeling like she can give in to that attraction. So, now we cut back to Genosha, as everyone is getting ready for the big gala event. Before that, Rogue goes to Gambit, who for once looks cool in his white suit. She recounts Magneto's offer and the past they share. Apparently, in the past that has been shoehorned in, after Rogue was taken in by Mystique in disguise, she was taken to the Savage Land to be trained by Magneto. For reasons, she showed up in her torn Savage Land bikini look from Jim Lee's run on the Uncanny X-Men. She wore this the whole time. Magneto was also apparently immediately into it, because as he leered down at her from his throne, we're supposed to surmise a building attraction. Magneto exposed her to all of his ideas for mutant kind, art, fashion, culture, etc. This idea of Magneto being some mutant culture fanatic is all taken from Grant Morrison's run on New X-Men, by the way. So, after Magneto paints Rogue like one of his French girls, and treated her to a meal where he wore his creeper robe, they discovered that his electromagnetic field protected him from her power. And so, of course, they did the obvious thing in a cartoon based on a children's cartoon from the 90s. They banged. But Rogue, sensing the anger in him, left and eventually ended up with the X-Men, where Magneto pretended like he never met her. Such good writing on display. Gambit, in one of the few good moments of voice acting and good dialogue, wish the same could be said for Rogue, expresses they have been play-acting their roles as Swamp Rat and Cher. He says an actually healthy thing and expresses that first and foremost, he is Rogue's friend and will be there for her after Magneto has left her. Okay, back to Cyclops and Jean at the mansion. Alone in a bedroom, Jean is asking Scott to describe baby Nathan to her. He describes what he imagines as brown eyes and wild red hair. They begin kissing, and we discover, dun dun dun, it's actually Madeline having a psychic affair with Cyclops. Jean interrupts playing the scorned lover, and we get an as the world turns soap opera argument between Cyclops and Jean. It ends with Jean getting a brain blast. And then the gala happens. Okay. I'm not giving a full critique yet, just plot. Keep it to plot. The gala is a thing that happens. Mutants in fancy outfits. Magneto being bitchy to Val Cooper. The show really wants you to know how clever Magneto is with his terrorist as world leader, world leaders act like terrorists line. He's so witty. Gambit is moody at the bar. They hint that Madeline was going to try and hook up with him. Then Rogue flies in. She hovers in the air. Magneto flies up to her. And then, how best to explain this? Okay, first of all, we get a brief glimpse of my personal favorite X-Man, Archangel, and honestly, thank God that's the last I saw of him in this show. Okay, get through it. We then get the creepily horny section of this episode when Magneto air grinds on Rogue to Ace of Base's Happy Nation. This goes on for way too long until Rogue and Magneto make out and Gambit leaves. After that, Rogue realizes the spark isn't there for Magneto. Right at that moment, Madeline gets the same brain blast Jean got, hearing, "Shut the music off!" over and over. She senses something wrong, hears the same voice from outside, goes out and sees Cable running in, saying, "Shut the music off! I'm too late again!" Madeline realizes that he is Nathan, all grown up. His computer shunts him back to the future, and he says, "I'm sorry, Mom." Then there's a massive explosion. Rogue wakes up. Nightcrawler saves her. They see Banshee get roasted in the blast of a massive kaiju sentinel that has 3 heads. This is pulled directly from the Grant Morrison run. Sebastian Shaw, Callisto, and Madeline are all killed. Gambit, Magneto, and Rogue all rush to save the remaining Morlocks as the Tri-Sentinel continues blasting. And for once, we get some good character moments. Magneto finally is shown to be as powerful as he truly is, using a monorail to fight the massive Sentinel. Gambit gets several impactful moments, and then the moment happens. Magneto tries to save the Morlocks. He's using his electromagnetic field to repel the main blast of the Tri-Sentinel, and then it crumples, and we get one actually good impactful moment with Magneto. He tells Leech not to be afraid in German, right before they perish. Rogue, enraged at this, flies at the kaiju sentinel, and it turns to blast her. Gambit, seeing what's about to happen, charges up his motorcycle and lets it fly at her. He fights the Tri-Sentinel. It impales him on a tentacle, and using his ability to ignite kinetic energy in an object, he does this to the entire massive Sentinel, blowing it up. The remaining X-Men all react to this on television, and the final scene shows Rogue saying, "I can't feel you." Apparently this was a reference to Wanda saying the same to Vision in WandaVision, a show we definitely want to reference and duplicate. Okay, boy, did this episode work on a lot of people. I'm seeing all kinds of posts and videos praising it. Everyone is so emotional over Gambit's final sacrifice and Rogue's last line. And hey, good job, show. You distracted everyone with a bunch of character deaths. You went bold, I'll give you that, and it has clearly paid off. So many articles and social media accounts praising this, but you know what? The show still sucks. All of the problems are still here, present and accounted for. They just got covered up with something shiny at the end. Okay, I'm going to deal with this right off the bat. Was Gambit's sacrifice cool in this episode? Sure, yeah, it had impact and came across as something he would do. There were massive plot contrivances to engineer the moment. Nightcrawler, who could have solved all of these problems being conveniently knocked out, being the primary one. The very trip to Genosha with just these three is a complete plot contrivance. When was the gala announced? Seems like Magneto, who's all about grooming, guiding young, impressionable female mutants, might have wanted Jubilee to go. But no, she's not in this episode or the next one. Apparently she and Sunspot have been in that room for a while. And this show is full of this abrupt, oh, now this is happening logic. Nothing is set up. Well, okay, I'll give you this. The Morlocks being in Genosha were, I guess, set up in episode 2. In a previous review, I spoke about how plot lines were being rushed and flashed through in minutes that could fill whole episodes, and here we are again. I argued specifically that the Morlock rescue should have been its own episode, focused on Magneto building a bond with the Morlocks, and showing the X-Men there was more to him than the creepy team leader. Here it is again. That moment was rushed, but now the writers want Magneto's sacrifice to be impactful and meaningful. They want Leech saying Magneto will save us to have maximum impact. Except that requires that you remember a moment that was there and gone without any real meaning. Hell, if you checked your phone or got a drink of water during that moment in episode 2, you'd have no idea why Leech would think that. And let's deal with the fact that Gambit's powers don't really work like they're being shown here. He can charge small objects, sometimes larger ones, but in the comics at least, he has a cap to how large of an object he can charge up and blow up. Him being able to ignite the entire Kaiju Sentinel, which is the size of multiple buildings, with all of its normal-sized Sentinels inside of it, promotes him to Omega level, something he never was. But a fan-favorite character was killed off. Again, we're pulling on nostalgia strings and doing this intentionally to trigger a response in fans that grew up with this character. It happened in a big way, and it was emotional. And continuing with some positives, I will say, I think the back half of this episode is the best the animation has looked. They could do lighting very well. I'll give them that. Also, Gambit was at least treated respectfully as a character here. He was heroic. He was charming. He had big moments even before his death. I genuinely liked him interacting with Nightcrawler. On that note, again, I think that Nightcrawler was presented here better than almost any other character. I prefer the slightly more crafty and charming version from Wolverine and the X-Men, but this one was good. I very much liked Gambit's reaction to Rogue in the moment after she told him about her desire for Magneto. That whole thing is loaded with issues, but Gambit isn't one of them. His reaction to her, saying that he would remain her friend and not being treated as a Pepe Le Pew archetype, were appreciated. As far as the actual sacrifice, okay, let's just acknowledge Cable's presence here before the event makes it very likely that the event will be reversed. If I'm wrong and they stick to it, I will credit the show with better creatives than I initially thought. This moment is definitely working on the surface level crowd, though. So many social media posts and videos about people being devastated and that they were not ready for this. Look, I get it. It's easy to get caught up in the emotion of the moment, but this show's core issues are still front and center. The pacing is terrible. The nostalgia people are feeling for Gambit are based on a character from a cartoon series that they grew up with. All the Gambit from this show did in the first 4 episodes was hang out in his crop top and catch attitude from Magneto. Again, this show, the one we're discussing, has barely any character work, and it's truly telling that simply by seeing them treat a character respectfully, I fully expected him to die. As soon as he had the moment telling Rogue he'd always be her friend, I knew it was happening. Seeing him actually dressed in a badass white tux and looking heroic only made it worse. After the attack, when he was the clear MVP of the assault to save the Morlocks, it was a sure thing. A narrative should not be so poor that the only time you treat a character with respect, you're setting up their death. Final positive, one brief moment of Magneto not being a creepy a-hole when he tells Leech not to be scared in German right before he met his end. For the briefest of seconds, I liked his character. It reminded me of the honorable but violent character he used to be. But it only made it worse in comparison to his characterization in the early moments of the episode. Okay, let's dig into the big criticism I have.
Where I want to focus this part of my issues, really, is, again, creepy over-sexualization of characters. So, Rogue explains that when she was just a young mutant being manipulated by Mystique, after she had only kissed a boy, Mystique sent her off to the Savage Land with Magneto. Now, immediately, this scene gets creepy. We have Magneto studying Rogue as she's standing there in her bikini and short shorts. Now, I know people are going to go, but that's from the comics. Okay, let's just context this for a moment. The moment in the comics when Rogue walks around the Savage Land in a bikini, yes, again, full acceptance that is a cheesecakey moment drawn by the great Jim Lee. The reason, though, in the story why it happens is she had just come through a portal after the Siege Perilous, been bounced around, and ended up in the Savage Land wearing only a t-shirt. I'm not saying that that is a full defense of why that's the only thing she can wear, but I'm explaining in the comic at the time there's at least an in-story explanation for why that is her outfit. She does meet up with Magneto after a battle with Carol Danvers. There's a whole complicated thing there about Rogue getting her powers I'm not going to go into, but she meets up with Magneto. He defends her from Carol Danvers. He splits the two personalities finally, and then they work together to take down another mutant who was taking over the Savage Land named Zaladane. They never kiss. There's a moment of slight romantic interaction from one panel, and that's it. The only time Magneto and Rogue were actually together prior to the early 2000s was in the Age of Apocalypse storyline, wherein Xavier had been killed. We cut to years later, and they are a married couple with a son. It works in an alternate timeline, but in the main timeline, it doesn't. Why this bothers me so much is A, they were showing footage from the original X-Men series, again, trying to shoehorn in their version of the X-Men into the one that people like me grew up with.
I think it's telling that this moment is so awkward that people had to find Bo DeMeo, the former showrunner, on Twitter to ask him how old Rogue was in this moment. And you know, there's just something about a shirtless man in his very tasteful, so tasteful selfie, clarifying that the cartoon character from a children's cartoon show who was sleeping with a man who's 40 years her senior when she's never had an experience before is having to clarify that this girl is in her 20s. You know, there's just no other words for it. It is just peak Disney, this moment right here. I mean, the only other way to describe it is...
Okay, so let's just get into this. If you're going to make it explicit that all Rogue wanted was a physical, literally physical connection with someone,
Class.
never really with Gambit, what you're doing is opening up all kinds of counter-arguments to this. And just to be specific about this, if we're going to treat these like a real-world R-rated, let's get into the nitty-gritty on sex and intercourse in a children's cartoon, then at least be honest about the fact that there are multiple ways Gambit and Rogue could have interacted that we have in our world. And you're telling me Beast never could have come up with something? If he really needed to? But see, the show never used to be about that, but that's what these showrunners want to make it about. So, of course, then we get to the dance scene, and all the people on Twitter who think that this is everything. It's Magneto grinding on Rogue and being, again, as creepy as he possibly can be, set to an Ace of Base song. I want to, like, it makes me want to do the Frank Grimes, just inarticulate screaming and noises. It's not a story about discrimination and a group of heroes struggling to find their way in the world. That comes together to protect each other and those around them. It's a weird, fast-paced, clipped-through narrative about all these different greatest hits from the X-Men. Now, I'm going to also dive into episode 6 here real quick because there just isn't enough to talk about from that episode to really do anything more than tie it in. So, In the comics, the Tri-Sentinel attack was brought about by Cassandra Nova in the Grant Morrison run on New X-Men. Cassandra Nova is a much more complicated character who comes from a whole idea that she's a spirit or creature from the astral plane that attached to Xavier in the womb and copied him. Grant Morrison is a weird writer, and tried to strangle him, so in the womb he created a psychic blast that killed her and caused a stillbirth. The creature that produced from that stillbirth developed into Cassandra Nova, a creature that viewed only she and Xavier as the only two real things in the world and wanted to strip everything that he cared for from him. So, she takes the genetic information of the last living relative of Bolivar Trask, kills him, injects herself with nanites so that the X-Men can't kill her, and then unleashes the giant Kaiju Sentinel on Genosha. Magneto is there, Emma Frost is there, the Sentinel decimates the island, and thus we have the remaining story for the new X-Men run. In episode 6, it's revealed that, nope, it was Sinister. It was Sinister. He did it. Because after he effed off after the end of episode 3, when he infected baby Nathan with the organic virus, apparently his ultimate plan is to wipe out mutants. I don't know. Sinister's motivations in the comics were always actually more that he wanted to play around with genetics and create the perfect mutant. This isn't what Claremont originally had in mind for him, and I'm probably going to make a video focused on Mr. Sinister because I think it's actually a pretty fascinating narrative thing. But anyway, the rest of episode 6, just to talk about this real quick, Xavier is up with the Shi'ar Empire. We, of course, have to deal with a whole weird storyline where Deathbird, Lalandra's sister, calls Earth a ghetto and basically is saying Magneto's from the slums and not their kind, so we're forcing a racism allegory in there. Okay, fine. The X-Men has always allowed for that, so whatever. It's not really a super offensive storyline. The only thing that irks me is when Xavier has his really hammy moment when he realizes all the death and destruction that's happened. His rant goes, "They were dancing, making love." Then we also have Storm's storyline where she's still at the cabin with Forge, who Forge now magically, I guess, is part of the Doctor Strange magic universe, or his mom was. I guess she went to Kamartaj because Forge out of nowhere is able to banish the demon plaguing Storm by throwing Doctor Strange magic at it. Then Storm meets up with the same creature in a coal mine, realizes that her true power was there all along, manifests her 70s original costume, and then they just shot for shot copied Superman flying around for the first time from Man of Steel. Now, this is after Storm caused a weather event that would have wiped out tons of indigenous life and really damaged that part of the world. But, it's a cool, powerful moment. And again, insert Frank Grimes' inarticulate screaming noises there. Now, touching on the whole Cyclops rant that everybody's like, oh my god, Cyclops is now my favorite because he said the thing that everybody should have been saying for so long. Okay, I understand Cyclops was on camera and he said the whole thing about, like, you're lucky us mutants are there, we protect you, all that. Great. That's not Cyclops. That's not the character. That is whatever this weird Jerry Smith version of Cyclops they're doing is. Oh, and we also managed to shoehorn into episode 5 that Cyclops is cheating on Jean with Madeline in his mind, and has been for a month. This is also pulled from the Grant Morrison New X-Men run. In that comic, it was the White Queen, Emma Frost, who was still recovering from the whole Genosha attack and was taken in by the X-Men. Jean at the time is reconnecting with the Phoenix Force and is becoming more distant from Cyclops, and that is what leads to it. But you remember in a previous video, I said the issue with the whole Madeline storyline in the comics was it opened up Cyclops to later infidelity. And I actually had praised the show, saying I liked that they changed, that he always thought she was Jean because it was kind of protecting his character from that. Nope, they're just doing it anyway. So never mind that, vague compliment I gave them. They're just going to make him a POS who cheats on his wife anyway. So we get that. And then, after he shares really private information with a news reporter that he wouldn't share, he goes off on this rant about how mutants are there to help humans and all that. Yeah, the whole mission statement of the X-Men is essentially they're a counterterrorism unit. What they're supposed to do is protect humans from other dangerous mutants who are extremists who will hurt humans. So they've been trained up to protect humans from that. Now, yes, you could say humanity is lucky they're there, but you could make the counter argument that if there weren't mutants with abilities that would possibly hurt people and were willing to, there wouldn't need to be an X-Men. So it kind of fundamentally flaws Cyclops to have him not understand that and to lash out in that way. Plus, it wasn't a human that did that to his son. It was another mutant. In closing, again, I will never tell anyone that they are wrong for liking something or for enjoying a piece of media. But this whole almost cult that's surrounding this, it's almost like a Zack Snyder-esque thing where everybody is trying to claim that this is everything, to quote Nando again. And it's all these videos just losing their minds over one character sacrifice that it's pretty heavily implied is going to be reversed anyway. So I get that moment paid off. But this is at just ignoring so many other issues and how weird and inappropriate this show is. Again, I keep coming back to Invincible as a comparison because Invincible has adult themes. It has characters interacting in a sexual way. It has the language. It has the violence. But it also has good storytelling. None of that is going on with this show. Again, when you clip through plots and storylines, like I said, this end of this show should have probably been the opener for a season 2. That's how this should have happened. The Madeline Pryor storyline should have closed out season 1. Then you open in Genosha with this happening. You build up a connection between Rogue and Magneto that isn't this creepy groomer pass that they gave them. And then you go forward into a season 2 with Gambit dead the entire season, and then you bring him back at the end with whatever big resolve they're going to do there. If you want to bring mature themes into a story like this, that is commendable. However, this has also been done better in other X-Men films. Humans as the enemy to X-Men has been done much better in X-Men 2. Logan also has that. Logan is R-rated, it has strong violence, it has no sexual themes, so that doesn't need to be a requirement in any story. And I find it hard to talk about this without it sounding like I'm prude or I don't want any physical interaction between characters. Nothing could be further from the truth.
A good example of what I mean is in the 1984 film Terminator, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, and Michael Biehn.
Terminator has a love scene between Linda Hamilton, Sarah Connor, and Michael Biehn's Kyle Reese. The whole movie hinges on that love scene. Everything about him and her hinges on that moment of connection between the two. That's why the movie is happening. It is explicit in some ways, but it's also very tastefully done. You've built to that moment. It's his expression of love that brings her to him, and then they make love, and then she loses him at the end of the film. It's beautifully done. It's not ham-fisted. It's not weirdly shoved in for the sake of having these awkward adult moments. You can do that in multiple stories, and there's so many more I could point to. Going back to Logan, Logan has themes of aging and loss and sorrow and fatherhood and unfulfilled potential and all of these other things going on. It's a Western. It has incredible character work. And it all is kind of wrapped in this whole alternate future. So I, for one, am fine with taking an inspiration from a comic. Logan is extremely different than the comic it's based on. And changing those plots and stories to suit the narrative you want to tell. If that narrative is well told. This is not. And I'm going to keep saying that as often as these horrible moments show up in this show that people seem to be latching onto as true X-Men. It's not true X-Men. It's one showrunner's very damaged take on this property, and I will continue to say that for as long as I see these things pop up in this show. I will praise the things that work. Again, the action was much better. Nightcrawler was very well realized, and there was real emotion and impact in the death. I liked the moment of Magneto saving the kids, or trying to, and then trying to comfort them in German. That was actually a really good character beat, and I just wish we could get more of that. Unfortunately, episode 6 was not anything to write home about either, and so here we are. I can't say I'm looking forward to episode 7, but I can say I'm looking forward to there only being 3 left. So if you liked what you saw, if you liked what you heard, thank you for sticking around this long. I should have more illustrations coming. I'm watching Fallout right now. I'm right in the middle of that series and really enjoying it. A few criticisms, but overall really entertaining. I also am still hard at work on my Captain Marvel pitch. I should have that out here pretty soon in the next week or two. So again, I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed all of the discussion here. I hope you enjoyed the points that have been made. If you didn't, please feel free to leave a comment. Until next time, maximum effort. Freaking Disney.